this compound you're talking about in terms of the African sense is, you know, viable communities did live like that. You understand what I mean? They shared knowledge, they shared food, they shared a safety of infrastructure and a sense of protectionism, and also, you know, raise our kids. The rule of law was also entrenched in these kind of compounds that the Africans have in an African setting. But what happened is that, you know, the emergence of the white settler didn't lead to an integration of the African notion of a compound and the European notion of a compound with a monetary system. These two dichotomies, you know, have played themselves out in South Africa in the last 4 centuries. So the emergence of what you see as urbanization in South Africa is also the bastardization of this notion of a lack of multiculturalism playing itself out in the kind of urban compounding that you have.
Compounding is when you kind of multiply things in a way, and I guess the term which everybody kind of associates with compounding is actually compound interest. It's the interest which you earn on the capital that you invest, but also you earn interest on that interest as well. And the beauty of it is, you know, even Einstein calls it the 8th wonder of the world. It's just such a magical feature in the sense that you're not just earning interest on the capital on a running basis, but you're actually earning that interest on the interest, and it makes your investment grow much faster than it would if you were just earning interest on your capital.
A rooming tenement and a tenement that has self-contained flats is, if you as a family just occupy one room, or even as an individual, there are communal facilities that you share with other people, whether it's the ablution or the cooking space or the washing, where you hang your washing. So even if a tenement, a rooming tenement is built purely for profit, it does contain sort of communal spaces that might not be optimal, but that people share, and people have to make that work in the sort of rooming setup. And I think that links to your idea of compound.
It's a very obscure thing to discuss the notion of the physical compound, unless you were living in somewhere like 1600. You understand what I mean? Where basically they were supposed to live and derive value and work and have a social kind of compounded interest in terms of the social relationships within themselves, within these homelands. But it's seldom that you actually see fixed structures of, you know, these 16th century compounds in South Africa. But I think that when you speak about South Africa, then what you can have is that the notion of compounding would probably be social compounding or mobilization. So if people are living in common language areas, right, they basically mobilize themselves to try and get better ability access to services, access to water, access to equal rights as we've had in South Africa. So compounding in South Africa, you'd say, is much more societal rather than economic or urban compounding. Because you'll find that even, let's say in affordable housing, for an example, the affordable housing is built outside of the particular cities. The revenue doesn't really generate itself within those particular areas, so you can't have some kind of actual physical financial compounding as you would have in finance, because people have to still go outside those areas, not only to go shopping, but to also to have their jobs, and then they bring their money back only to eat food. It's not for capital appreciation or, you know, appreciation of the area or reinventing the area. It's like the notion of town, where we used to have a CBD, and if you look at the notion of compounding or compound interest, the CBD should continue to generate itself and to make itself better according to, you know, the revenue that's coming into South Africa or into Johannesburg. But no matter how much revenue came into Johannesburg as being the biggest financial earner, you'll find that there was still capital flight out of a physical area instead of what you call compound urbanization, where that area should have been regentrified and should have been made better according to the earnings. The demands of urbanization in the South African landscape is so complex. You find that the influx of a multiplicity of different cultures, whether it's your Nigerian, Zairean, Zimbabwean, or whatever, actually rather scares most South Africans than rather make them complex. Because you find in other countries, different cultures bring about a certain amount of complexity, and that complexity also generates a certain amount of funding structures. So you have a certain compound interest in terms of London not only gets rich financially, but also gets rich very multiculturally. But in South Africa, because of what has happened with apartheid, it becomes very difficult to have urban compounding unless you are, let's say you're black or any other culture and you move to a historically white neighborhood, and then you become a participant of that particular neighborhood. Then what you're finding is that the South African neighborhoods, the ones that manage to accept this multicultural nature of South Africa, have that notion of compounding. In South Africa, it's going to be a challenge not to reserve urban compounding for middle class and upper class, but also to say, how do you then bring it to, you know, this area of affordable housing or the multicultural areas that you find in middle of Johannesburg, where business has run away from, because perhaps South African business still fears complexity or still fears cultural dynamism within a fixed space.
For us was really the idea of being connected on a social level to a neighborhood and to people in the neighborhood. It's not family, but it's sort of people that share a similar idea of how you live in Johannesburg, in the city. I think it's, considering Brixton, it's very much, it's an area that is very walkable, where you don't have high fences, where you basically have a relationship to the street. And I think it's very much, as we design sort of the house and the massing of it, it's very much about what happens outside of it, in terms of the public space. And the house and office is not actually, the idea of investing there is not restricted to what the property is. It's much more. It's sort of, it's the relationship to the park, it's the relationship to a very strong community that does things on a monthly basis, that has an interest in regenerating the area. So I think it's very much about this human contact as well, that we found was very important for our lifestyle, and we thought we would miss if we would move somewhere else, or we'd have to completely rebuild. So I think this project is very much considered on a small architectural scale, as much as it is considered on a contextual scale as to where it is located.
I think the type of people that we've connected with are really interesting, and they, in a way, share some of the values and outlooks that we have. And I mean, we're not susceptible to consumerism, and but in a way, this is what we also could afford. And so the economic decision is that here we can afford the office and the house, and in about 5 to 6 to 7 years, the savings in rental on the office would in a way offset the over-investment in an area that was redlined by the banks.
So the monetizing of South Africa, basically, it developed in a warped way, where the settlements immediately engaged themselves in some financial class, right? And with the Africans really on the outskirts of this financial system that was emerging within European South Africa, which landed, right? Urban compounding should be generally across the board.
What should be would be determined by what is.
You know, whites, you're Indians or whatever. But what you find in South Africa is you have fragmented urban compounding, but it reinforces your class and your class barrier, and the stratification of this apartheid system still plays itself out in urban South Africa. So urban compounding will be that all the different cultural groups of sub-Saharan Africa which come to South Africa will be stuck in your CBD.
But some of the properties in the inner city of Johannesburg have got a very rich history, and I think the spaces are beautiful. Some of the views are beautiful, and it's just a space which is very, very much alive.
That's kind of like your entry-level lower class. You understand what I mean? Above that, then there's a certain kind of compounding that happens in living spaces, prayer spaces, economic spaces, in terms of the informal markets that take place there.
I see there's a lot of value there. There's probably a space for us to have mixed use of buildings, much in the same way as they do many other countries. Have a ground floor that actually is used for retail space, and then have the upper floors possibly as office spaces and living spaces, and it becomes a nucleus for where people can interact with each other.
The fascinating thing in Nairobi's tenement district is that the streets are incredibly active spaces. There's something on the go all the time. Not purely, well, on the one hand, because of the high density and so many people needing to go back and forth to their units and out of the district to go and work. But then again, at the same time, there's stalls selling things, there's shops on the ground floors, so the streets are alive all the time. So on the one hand, this very high quality of streets with all the qualities that the international urban design discourse talks about, a street with shops and with vibrant activity that depends on density and so on. All of that exists, but there's no other space, no other public space. The streets get defended merely because they have a function of being a street.
And they're very multicultural, but it's obviously class, you know. And you find that the only social barrier in this middle class to upper class South Africa becomes less and less about color, but it becomes more about the structure of the walls. You see what I mean? And it's the structure of the walls itself that's an impediment to kind of social cohesion within South Africa. Because if you go to any other major city in the world, you don't have as many gated or walled communities in South Africa. So that's an impediment also on the notion of compound interest within communities, particularly from a social side.
I think the problem is that they try and offer everything to the individual, individualized. So each household would have everything inside their flat. They don't need to share anything. There might be a pool somewhere, but they have a garage, they have a kind of, you know, driveway up to their house, and which kind of defeats the idea of a compound. So I think the fact that it's gated, that there's a wall around us, is purely a security thing, but the people inside are not expected to have much in common other than maybe their class.
You find like that the social prisoner mindset in South Africa within people playing itself out even in social spaces. You know what I mean? I can come out to a particular social space, but I still have to go back to my gated walls or my cell. You know what I mean? And there you discuss, you know, the issues of change, the issues of social cohesion, but it's still within what do you call it? A stratified. Everything in South Africa becomes, the architecture leads itself to social stratification. But as I said before, it's a byproduct of how we've developed from 16th century. So I think that the issue of urban compound is very complicated, and it's probably reserved for maybe a 2 or 3 day seminar. And I think you could get a lot of people generating interest from it.
Perhaps that's the idea of living in a democratic city, in a way, where you can communicate, where you equal with other people and you share things.